Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on from Actuarial Association of Europe. I will say a couple of words about that in a minute. We have a webinar on Solvency II review where we are now and what is expected. So it's a really current topic. Well, Solvency II seems to be usually always very current, but now we are certainly in the middle of a lot happening. So thank you for joining, and we will certainly have a really fruitful kind of lot of information, good discussion. Please stay until the very end. There will be we will have a lot of talk about, and also be active. Anyway, so what we have here is that in today's agenda, I would say a couple of words about AAE. And just for those who might not be aware of that. But then we will have the first speaker is Patrick Hoedjes, head of the Policy and Supervisory Convergence Department at EIOPA. Patrick has been in EIOPA quite a long and also really widely connected to different work of EIOPA. So we are really glad to have Patrick here today talking about this topic. So which certainly will help us understanding a lot. And Patrick also is able to stay on the very end during the Q&A, so we will have also a discussion with him and other speakers. Then after Patrick, we have the completion of the Prudential framework and the main topics of the AAE. Here we have the AAE Grandmaster on Solvency II, Siegbert Baldauf. Really good to have you here talking about this. And then Daphné, Leval, the vice chairperson of the insurance committee, and then quite connected to the sustainability work and also being part of many of the technical papers of Solvency II. So we really have the kind of the brains on this topic today on what we have been doing in AAE. Myself, I'm Lauri, Saraste, the chairperson of the insurance committee in AAE and moderating the Q&A and also collecting the questions what you might have. So please, you won't be allowed to have kind of questions by speaking. Sorry about that. There are so many of you today, but we will collect your comments and questions, which we will pick on the Q&A. So and also you can like from each other's questions and raise awareness that we certainly would pick those in the very end. So this would be the agenda for today. Just a couple of words on AAE. So AAE is the roof organizations of the national actuarial associations in Europe. I think we have something like 30,000 qualified actuaries among the members. So it's a big organization. And also we have a lot of discussions with actuaries across Europe. So also we identify a lot different topics that are coming up from the actuarial work. Solvency II, sorry, being a really important part of that work and always attracts a lot of discussions and thinking. In AAE, we share the kind of do have values what we say out loud. We are concerned for the public interest. We are really kind of about integrity and independence and collaboration as describe the organization, and then we certainly try to be transparent and accountable on what we do. So we and on Solvency II, AAE has been doing a lot of work since it started and even a lot before, and Siegbert, for instance, has been around this work a long time, and which has helped AAE to fulfill kind of the things for its members. We also are active in ongoing consultation, and we do have discussions with kind of different stakeholders and policymakers about this. But anyway, this is the AAE. You certainly can find a lot more information about it from the website if needed. So this was kind of this was kind of a just to say what it is, and now let's go to the topic. I will just change the presentation. So, so Patrick, please, the stage is yours. Just a minute, so I will share the screen to everyone. See.
Thank you very much, Lauri, and indeed, good morning to everybody, and I'm very happy to be with you here this morning. And thank you also to AAE for the kind invitation, and it's my pleasure to be in this event. I'm also curious to listen in and also to see from the audience the kind of questions that they have. It's very important for us to have this type of outreach to listen and to hear what is, you could say, alive on the ground. Because that's not always as easy, of course, working together on such a great number of topics with a very small dedicated team. We're quite busy, so I think this is for us very good opportunities to use the opportunity to really listen and to understand what the views are out there. So maybe on this first slide, just a couple of words before we go into the presentation. I don't have a lengthy presentation with a lot of detail, so no worries there. I think also we have a quite large group. I see close to 180 persons on the call today. So I can assume that some of you know very well and very deeply and are very knowledgeable on Solvency II, on EIOPA, on its functionings, but not all of you. So just a couple of words first on myself and then on the organization, so that you have a little bit of a picture. Lauri already mentioned I have been at EIOPA for quite a long time now, actually before it was EIOPA already, so since 2010. Worked in many areas of the organization, mainly you could say on the more operational side, so finance, HR, IT in the first year, so much more organizational. Then I moved to what we call at EIOPA oversight, so you could say the supervisory arm of the organization. This you have to think about more, you could say, issues that are around cross-border. EIOPA's participation in colleges, so where groups active in Europe, but the supervisor of those groups meet. And I work also on more technical details like the internal models supervision. This is a job that I did until the end of last year. And then we had some reorganizations in the organization where policy work together with supervisory convergence work, which is, you could say, more about the practices. So not about the rules, but how the rules are being, you could say, practically applied by national supervisors. The aim was to bring that together. And since April of this year, I'm leading this new department. And just to give you a little bit of an overview of what we are as an organization, and in that context, what the department I represent means in that organization. We at EIOPA we have around 180 staff members. Now that might sound like a lot, but if you look at the scope of activities that we're doing, actually you can see that the teams are relatively small. So the team that I represent today, which is the policy team at EIOPA under my department, it's actually 4 staff members. So they are the ones that are responsible, amongst others, on the Solvency II review, but there are also some other activities ongoing in that team. In the department next to the policy team, there is also 4 other teams and units. There is the supervisory convergence unit, which, as I said, is more dealing with the practical elements. And one of the products that they recently, you could say, also published is also a consultation. So we have consultations on Solvency II, but we also have consultations next to that, which is on the mass lapse reinsurance. So this is indeed, there is rules around how that should be treated, but then we see in practice that you could say the deviations between how national supervisors apply those rules, and then we try to come to a more consistent application of those rules. So that's what's being done amongst others in the supervisory convergence unit. Then we have the international team. They are very active this week, you could say, in Cape Town. So they are the ones that are contributing to all the work in the IAS, so the International Association of insurance supervisors, and of course, a key our milestone deliverable this week was the ICS, so the International Global Standard. Then there is another unit which is called sustainability. That is, you could say, a relatively small unit, because actually at the moment there is 4 staff members there as well. But there's a lot of interaction and interlinkages with the rest of the organization, because sustainability is, of course, can you still say it's an emerging risk? Maybe it's already a well-established risk, because it's indeed playing in front of us, you could say, in real time. And there are many linkages also with the macro-prudential work that we're doing, with the conduct work. So that is coordinated, you could say, from that team. And the final team in the department is on pensions. Also, they're a relatively small group, working both on the policy in pensions, but also on the oversight activities and the supervisory convergence activities. So that's the department. It's when it's fully in its full capacity, and I hope to reach at some point, it's close to 30 people. And we cover indeed then all the areas of policy that are on the Prudential side, both, you could say, within Europe, internationally, and also could say in all the upcoming areas of work. So that's, I think, just as a little bit of an introduction of EIOPA. You know, we are responsible for the policy. We are an advisory body also to the Commission and to the Parliament and the Council. And in that capacity, a lot of the work that we are doing on today's topic, Solvency II, takes place. So if you move to the next slide. Yes, because that's just a quick overview of what you could say the review stands for. And the interesting thing here is that the quotes that we are taking here, that were shown here on the screen, they more or less say the same, but you can see some really nice subtle differences between, you could say, the aims on the underlying, you could say, steer that the different responsible parties have in the review. So first, of course, it's the EIOPA opinion that kickstarted the work. We delivered that 2020. There has, of course, been some delays on the implementation side due to COVID. So we hope that soon the work will be finalized and will enter into force, and then the actual review implementation starts. I will say a little bit about that later. But from our perspective, it was very much to keep, you could say, the regime fit for purpose. It has demonstrated over the years since entry into force in 2016 good resilience to the crisis, because we had some crisis in that period, but there were also some flaws that were detected, or you could say areas for improvement. And one very obvious one was, of course, on the interest rate. When designing Solvency II, we were living in a world that negative interest rates were something like, you know, a very wild imagination. And of course, we went into that area pretty soon. And of course, also some tools that are related to crisis that also needed some further tweaking to make sure that they respond in a more predictable and a better way to address, you could say, the concerns for which they were developed. And these are more crisis tools. And then there were, of course, some additional elements that were also added to the internet. And they are more in the area of macro-prudential supervision. So to bring in also in our Solvency II world, you could say not only the prudential, the micro-prudential supervision, but also the macro-prudential supervision, which makes it quite a unique framework. So the mantra on which we developed our advice in 2020 was evolution, not revolution. That's not very sexy term, you could say, to use, but it also reflects that in a way Solvency II proved to work, because it was, you could say, it came into force in a very volatile period, and it withstood the storms quite well. And we also see that in that sense, the uptake and the satisfaction with the regime is quite high. And of course, there's always, you could say, concerns, complaints, but I think overall, what we aimed to do with introducing Solvency II, namely introducing a risk-based approach, for companies and supervisors. We're not there where we need to be yet, but we made quite a lot of progress in our view. I think what we see in the quotes, to be honest, I think is indeed also some different levels of ambition with regards to capital relief and all the nice things you can do with released capital. Of course, here also political wishes and ideas come into fruition, and this is certainly not a dialogue that has ended yet. I think it's very clear, and you can see it also on the discussions that are currently ongoing with the installation also of the new commission, with the now rebaptized Savings and Investments Union, that there is quite an appetite to see how to, you could say, better use the available capital that we have. You can use it in ways to, you could say, increase the competitiveness as Europe as a market. And of course, here it's where we need to be, at the end of the day, careful. In our view, obviously, we come from a supervisory perspective. We have the aim, first and foremost, of policyholder protection. We feel that we have a good and stable system. We don't want to tweak it too much. I personally also don't believe in making huge changes. I think stability is sometimes a little bit underrated. I think it creates a lot of positive side effects that are not always appreciated. So for us, we want to keep the changes quite limited, because we feel that we struck a good balance, but we also need to see how we can address, you could say, the wishes of firing up the savings and investment union. And we do have some ideas at EIOPA that can help that, but we need to be also, I think, at the end of the day, very clear that if we lower capital requirements at the end of the day, we need to still make sure that is it still the 99.5, so the 1 in 200 year event that we can withstand, or are we just saying that in name and in reality we have actually a lower amount of protection? This, I think, is a careful balance to make sure that we don't cross that balance. If you go to the next slide, because I mentioned also something about the timelines that I wanted to share with you. So this is the best timeline that we have at the moment, and I think it's very likely that it will be January. Very likely. We still don't know 100% sure, but we're close to 100%, I would say. Which is, I think, a positive message in my view for smaller undertakings in the market. Because what it does de facto, it gives them a full more year of implementation. If we would have launched it in December, it would have been applied from December 2026. That means that the end year 2026 needed to be calculated on the basis of the new regime. January, just 2 weeks later, means a full year more, because then it means that it comes into force January 2027, meaning the end year reports of 2027 are the first ones that you need to comply with fully with the new regime. So this, I think, is a very positive message for smaller undertakings. This is also something that in previous discussions with the Commission we highlighted. I think it's also something I hope we will learn from. This was an accident. We all know that the timelines moved because of the political uncertainty, because of the new installation of the Commission that took longer. I think at the end of the day, at the political level, they resigned on the fact, okay, January also has its benefits. But what I personally observe as always a little bit remarkable is the rush to implement. We take many years. As I mentioned earlier, 2020, we did our review. We take many years to come with all these ideas. And then when it starts to come to implementation, we give companies, like say, sometimes less than 6 months to make sure that they report on new standards. And I prefer that we take a little bit longer for that, also going forward, to become a little bit more predictable for industry. But this is, of course, the wish list that we have. It's not always in our hands. And there are also downsides to this later implementation. And that is more, you could say, as we see it for the somewhat larger companies. Of course, there is some relief with the new measures, and that will also then kick in later. So that, I think, is a downside. The larger companies that are reporting on a quarterly basis, for them the impact is only 1 quarter later, obviously, but the same applies to the annual accounts there as well. the last thing I wanted to say about the timelines is that even though you could say we have now, in some cases, like a full more year, our internal planning, you could say, we made that in October this year. We finalized it, and there also was a very clear indication we will not change it anymore, even though the timelines may shift, and they have shifted from the political side. That just means that at the end of the day, we leave more room for implementation for industry. We do our best to work as quickly and as efficiently as possible to give you the most opportunity at the end of the day, once it's finalized, to implement it. Of course, it does mean that there's a lot of activities asked from you now with all the consultations that we're running. But I think at the end of the day, the implementation also needs to be done in a careful manner, and I think this is a choice we made. There is one caveat there, and I will mention it also a little bit later. Is of course a dependency with level 2, where also amendments are needed. We in some instruments we can only start working after we know more details from level 2. We have penciled in the planning that it will come somewhere at the start of Q2 next year, but there is of course some uncertainty. It's not fully in our hands. We know that the discussions will start next week in the expert group in Brussels, so they will restart. That will be the first discussion on level 2 next week. So let me go to the next slide then, the tasks for EIOPA. Here we see that there is some information on the number of new instruments. That it has not gone unnoticed for those of you that follow our website and follow our requests for public consultations. There is already some work actually delivered. We had to report on the Prudential treatment on sustainability risk. This was also part of the Solvency II review. This is already published, and 2 public consultations have already been finalized because they were they came in April this year as a request for advice for level 2. So with extremely short deadlines. Also given the fact that we insisted on having the 3 months consultation period. So that means that by the end of January, we need to deliver advice on the exposures to CCPs, which I think nobody really cares so much about because it's not a real issue in our industry. But the other one is on proportionality. And that is, of course, a very hotly debated topic. That is in how far do you could say smaller undertakings need to comply with all the complex rules and regulation in order to, at the end, come to the same level of policyholder protection. Because proportionality is not proportionality about how safe a company should be. That is, you could say, one and the same line. So there is no proportionality on policyholder protection. But of course, if a company is much simpler in structure, it's also much easier to, you could say, come to that level of comfort. Now, what we have seen in the past, and I think it's also not come unnoticed with industry and also with the political level, is that the opportunities to provide proportionality to, you could say, lower some of the, for instance, information requests from supervisors have not always been optimally used. So we need a little bit of a push in this area. We need a bit more incentives for our national supervisors to you could say, feel more comfortable, to be less information, to have less information, and to remain to the same level of comfort with regards to policyholder protection. What we saw in this consultation, just to give you a little bit of an insight on because it's still work in progress, we still need to go to our board to do the final proposals in January, and then we will send it to the Commission. The public consultation showed that there is from the industry side quite a lot of unhappiness in our proposals, saying that we're not going far enough. And you can say the same applies from our internal feedback that we get from our supervisory community that feels that we're going way too far on this. So personally, I think we struck the right balance probably there, because we reached, you could say, a level of unhappiness that is shared among the community as a whole. And this is, of course, a topic that it's very difficult to come to a point or a place where everybody that is involved is comfortable. So in that sense, these extreme short deadlines, I also say this internally, is a little bit of a blessing in disguise, because I feel that if we would have had 3 years for this topic, we would have taken 3 years, and we will probably have run in circles with a lot of the same comments and considerations coming back. So we will present some work in January. It will go to the Commission. I think it will look very much like what we consulted. There will be some, of course, changes coming from the consultation. But as I said, as the push and the pull is from different directions, it's probably what we produced is probably somewhere in that middle ground, that where we need to be. I mentioned already that there are consultations ongoing, 13 at the moment. 13, I have to say, related to Solvency II, because we also have 4 other consultations currently running. So 17 in total, where also 3 come from my department. So you can see we have been quite busy this period. We understand that this is also, of course, a burden to you, and that you need to select on which topic you respond to. And just to give you the example, we saw on proportionality many responses, and we saw on CCPs hardly any. And this is for us also fine, because we understand that this is also a reflection of the importance or the relevance of the topic for industry. So we also don't expect that you jump on all of them with the same vigor and the same energy. This is fine for us, but of course we are very eager to understand from you and to hear from you. The consultation period is always 3 months. We stick to that. We don't deviate, not in the plus and not in the minus. That also means that sometimes we indeed are asking your opinion, and we do get a lot of comments about that over the summer period or over the Christmas period. Yes, I have to acknowledge that. We also suffer from that same fate ourselves, when we often have requests coming from our political level with the same deadlines or the same in the same periods. We hope that the fact that the period is always 3 months gives you enough room for maneuver to also be able to dedicate that time that you need to it. If we go to the next slide, it's just I think a little bit of an overview of the instruments that we are having. So you see it's quite a diverse range of instruments. RTS, this is the ones that we have prioritized. RTS and ITS, we also have a number of new guidelines that we need to produce. Some reports, as I mentioned, one report is already finalized. Some advices, and of course these can still grow. We received 2 in April, and you never know, we may get some further requests. And one tool that we need to develop as well. Furthermore, we identified that there are quite a number of guidelines that need to be reviewed. And here, maybe it's important for you to also to anticipate a little bit. You are aware, or you may be aware, that there is a very strong push on reporting, reduction of the reporting burden, so-called 25%. I'm always a bit skeptical on the 25%, because I sometimes feel it becomes like a quantitative exercise, where of course reporting burden is not always in the number of data points that you need to report to us, but how you get to those data points. If you have to report to us 3 data points, but they're not in your systems, and you have to develop them, and you have no true understanding of what it is that we want with those numbers, it's massively burdensome. Whereas if you have to send us 1,000 data points, but they're actually in your basic administration, that's probably a lot easier. So we do look at those things. We do look at those considerations. We appreciate that. I think in the cooperation with the Actuarial Association, we feel it's always a very open and honest discussion. So I appreciate that very much. It's not, you could say, easy scoring with numbers, but really what hurts and where are alternatives, because sometimes understanding what we want and where you come from can lead to alternatives that gives us, you could say, the same understanding and the same possibilities to do our job, and provides a lot less burden to industry. And of course, that is what we try to always find out with these interactions to see, okay, understand where we both come from, and then see where are better solutions that we can find. So this is what we try to do. So in the guidelines, we also try to cut. Now, I understand that this is not really a big contributor to a reduction of reporting burden. However, I do feel it is important, one, as a message, but two, also as a mindset. And I think this is something that we try to change also with our supervisory community. When we introduced Solvency II in 2016, of course, it was a major step forward. It was a harmonized system in Europe. But it was also, we understood, very difficult to let go of national habits, national practices. You receive as a supervisor certain types of information. You feel personally that they're very important. You're the only one in Europe that collects that data, but still it ends up in the quantitative reporting framework because you want to stick to it. This is a little bit how it's, I'm exaggerating maybe a little bit, but this is a little bit how it, of course, went in 2016. I think we look now with some experience on the framework. We see better what is being used by our national supervisors in practice. All the reports are being used, but not all with the same intensity. So I think this is an important element that we are considering. And we also listen back to analyst consultants to see what they find useful. So we also expect to cut some in our reporting. My aim is to cut on the level of templates, because I feel that is much more burden release than trying to amend in the template certain data points, because ultimately that would require, again, change management on your side. And as I understand it, a change, even a very relatively small change, let's say a column less in the report, could already be a massive IT investment on your side. And we try to prevent that. If we go to the next slide, I think I already covered this a little bit. The regulatory burden, important for us, but we truly want to understand what causes regulatory burden. And I mentioned already, reporting requirements are those that we have clearly on our mind. The ITS on supervisory reporting is scheduled towards the summer of next year. But here, of course, we do have with the timelines of next year a little bit of a dependency, as I said earlier, on level 2. Guidelines I mentioned, proportionality mentioned. I think here everything I covered. If you go to the final slide, this is a little bit on where we are currently. I mentioned the open consultation, so the 13 open consultations, they're all running. There is one already in the pipeline for February next year, which is on the guidelines and the methods for determining the market share for reporting, also an important one, because here we see that the application of this, you could say, potential to release some of the market for reporting is used only in a handful of member states, and we feel that this can improve. So here also we want to make the guidelines a little bit more, you could say, practical and more prescriptive, to see if we can also there increase, you could say, the number of jurisdictions that use these methods and have some relief for reporting in their markets. Yeah, I think that is it. Maybe just on the further timelines. So we do have already in our own planning penciled in April another big batch of 8 instruments. But this is, as I said earlier, a bit dependent. We have to wait until we see a consultation from the Commission on level 2, because then I think it's more known in which direction they go. If we would go before them, it's a bit odd, because we would make references to what we anticipate coming from the Commission, and I think that would not be the right order. So we have a bit of dependency there. But assuming that they will stick to their timelines, we would have some in April, and also 6 more in June, and then a final round in October. This is currently the planning, but I do expect a little bit of a shift, maybe some months in the in the future due to some delays potentially in level 2. But as said earlier, we will keep the delays on our side as limited as possible. So we have started already some work on those instruments, anticipating the direction that the Commission take as far as we can. If there's too much uncertainty, of course we can't. But we try everything we can to stick to our internal deadlines. Also, I guess I said earlier in the beginning to give you the opportunity to have as much time as possible for implementation. That's it from my side. Many thanks, and I'm looking also forward to your questions and in the end to come back to that and have a discussion. Many thanks.
Thank you, Patrick, for this and really good presentation. I think you really covered kind of the overall thinking on what you need to kind of do in EIOPA and how you see the kind of this whole thing, which obviously helps a lot of understanding when you produce something. Then what is a setup, what you are kind of thinking about. So I think that's really helpful, and we certainly got a good kind of idea on where we are, what is kind of a bit on ahead. So thank you. So now let's not take questions now. There will be many, I'm sure, but let's go forward and deep dive to the Solvency II in more technical, in more on the structures of Solvency II, where Siegbert will tell us about that. And then also after Siegbert, let's go straight to Daphné, when she will also explain a little bit on the industry angle and different connections of all this. So Siegbert, please, floor is yours. And you are now in mute, by the way.
First, I have to unmute. Thank you, Lauri. I started a bit early in order to make sure that you can see my slides. Hopefully it works, and hopefully the sound is better. I saw some complaints regarding the sound. Hopefully everybody can understand me. So let's start with this consultation. I have to find the way to move the slides. Just a moment. Okay, well, it's a really short agenda. I started with a much more comprehensive set. And where are we now? What is next? It's an easy question. So where are we now? We have heard from Patrick that the directives are approved now. We have done a huge step towards a amended framework of Solvency II, but there are still a lot of issues open. And if you talk about this issue open, and if you want to make up your mind, you have to use some criteria what are of interest to you. And I just showed here on this slide what is in the Solvency II directive in recital 102 concerning the objectives. And one is, of course, the improve of risk sensitivity. We'll see this in several points. We want to mitigate excessive short-term volatility. That is an important issue from the position of practitioners who are doing these calculations, and you want to have a kind of stable situation, or a predictable situation. And of course, the others are already done. Here we have what also Patrick touched on. We have this mandatory review. It started with the review of the long-term guarantee measures that was required by Article 77F. But then we had some remainders from the SCR review, like the interest rate risk. It was not dealt with at that time. It was postponed for the review here of the Solvency II framework. And then we have extensions of the Solvency II framework by macroprudential tools, by ESG issues, and by an additional directive on recovery and resolution. So what we have already, and an important issue is also this, what is in the box here, the increase of the contribution, long-term financing of European projects. And that is an issue where what is important and what can be seen in several points. Now, what made it a bit problematic now to come to this new assessment, the legislator can decide which elements should be part of the legislative act or directive, and what is a political issue and should be reflected in the directive. So this is the question that had some impact on the Commission's proposal. Commission had proposed a directive, and this was a bit heavily discussed with the European Parliament. And the rapporteur of the European Parliament wrote in his draft report from June, the risk-free interest rate curve, including extrapolated part, the risk margin, the volatility adjustment, the long-term equities investment are political instruments and political solutions that should not be dealt with in delegated acts. So this changed a bit the picture. Now here I have shown what has happened in the past and what should be considered when we are talking about the Solvency II review. The start was easy. It was in 2009. The basic data started from them. Then we had Omnibus 2, introducing the long-term guarantee measures. Then Solvency II came into force. And then the start of the review was in this period of very, very deep, low interest rates. You can see the risk-free rates here depicted on the right-hand side. So it's a kind of two worlds. This can be, of course, an advantage because we can assess the things that we are doing within Solvency II against different economic or environments and see how it suits for this. Now, there are what I want to sorry. There are a lot of empowerments in this directive concerning some of the issues I have just mentioned: extrapolation, volatility adjustment, cost of capital rate, prudent deterministic valuation, matching adjustment, crypto assets, long-term equity investments, interest rate risk submodule, extension of deadlines, the SNCU, small and non-complex undertakings, it's a proportionality issue, and macroprudential issues. That's what I want to see. We can partly anticipate what will come from the European Commission. We had also touched on these issues in AAE's opinion on the Solvency II review in the past, and we have tackled it again in a perspective paper in the published in June this year. The basic is we can go back to a paper that has been published in 2020 together with the Solvency II review, and then see what was the Commission's view on the issues laid down in this opinion and not covered in the level 1 in the directive. And so the further amendments of the delegated regulation, as is written here, and it's indeed the case, is significantly important for the final outcome of the framework, of the changed framework, and the amendments should be broadly in line with EIOPA's opinion. That is, of course, an indication where we could go for. And then you see, let's start with the LTG measures. On the equity risk box, you can see the duration-based equity risk submodule. This will not be prolonged again. Symmetric adjustment, there is a change. They want to extend the corridor from -10 + 10 to -13 + 13%. That is already done in the directive, and we don't need to kind of guess what could be the outcome. The valuation of the liabilities, especially the risk extrapolation of the risk-free interest rate and the volatility adjustment, are of high importance for the undertakings. The volatility adjustment, at least in the 2020 LTG report of EIOPA, was used by 630 undertakings, so it is an important issue in 21 countries. And then transitional measures, it's not no significant change. It's a bit more on reporting and the question who could apply for this again. And in exceptional adverse situations, okay, that is also an issue where we have minor changes. The extrapolation has been a main component, a main issue that we had dealt with in the AAE. On the left-hand side, you can see the current methodology. It is determined by a recital in the Omnibus II directive. And it says, okay, if you want to extrapolate, of course, you first have to identify where do I have deep, liquid, transparent markets. And as soon as we don't have these criteria met, we have to extrapolate the risk-free rate curve, because we have durations of 70, 60, 70 years in life insurance, for example. And so the old version was we should take the Smith-Wilson method and make sure that was not required, but we should ensure that 40 years past the start of the extrapolation, we should be extrapolated forward rates. These should be not more than 3 basis points away from the ultimate forward rate. And this Smith-Wilson method was introduced and was used since then to determine this curve. And by the way, Smith-Wilson is also the methodology that is used in the international capital standards that had been approved the day before yesterday. And now we have a different way. We want to introduce a methodology that is still based on forward rates converging to an ultimate forward rate, but there is no requirement to reach this ultimate forward rate in a given period. And so that was one of the changes that was done by the European Parliament. They required now that the weight of the ultimate forward rate shall be at least 77.5% of the ultimate 77.5%. That's it. What does it mean? The formula is, you can say, the methodology is much easier than the Smith-Wilson method that has used. You can do the calculation almost on your own, and you see that we have here a formula. I can show it a bit better in the next time. The convergence process is determined by these curves that are depicted in this box, B alpha H. If you choose an alpha of 10%, you will have a decline of the curve, of the orange curve. If you have 20%, it will be much faster. And if you have a lower percentage, it will take longer. And that is a situation that impacts heavily on the outcome of on the extrapolated curve, especially in case of significant changes in the interest rate environment. We have here the weight of the ultimate forward rate. I have written the formula a bit differently. And what you can see here, the now required minimum weight of ultimate forward rate of 77.5% means a limitation of the convergence speed alpha. And it cannot be the 10% that it has been in the proposal of EIOPA. It has now to be a minimum of 10.975%. So I would not expect the 10.975% to be prescribed, but taken 11%. And you can see what this means if you look at the situation in 2020. I have taken the situation in 2020 because we had this negative interest rates for the first 20 years and up to the last liquid point. And if you look at these curves, you can see if you choose the 11%, the first SW means the Smith-Wilson curve. It is the highest curve in this picture. And if you look at the 11%, it stays considerably below this curve. If you look at the perhaps 17%, it would reach the Smith-Wilson curve. Already, it would be good. I think 19% would have been sufficient to be almost exact this curve. And that means that what I thought lesson learned from low interest rate environment, is that we have seen, if you look at this box of this table extrapolation, and we had two impact assessments, one in 2019, end of 2019, and the next one in June 2020. And what you can see is that we're in the line extrapolation, you see a huge additional amount of capital that would be needed to cope with this change in the in the interest rate environment. So this is the reason, well, at least I suppose that this is a reason that this Article 77A on extrapolation is extended by a possibility to have a phasing in process that you can approximate the final proposed convergence factor over several years until the 1st of January 2032. That is, you start with an alpha that is close to the Smith-Wilson curve at that moment, and then you decrease the alpha until you have reached the final version. That is, of course, only necessary if you have a situation comparable to what we have seen in 2020. If you look at the interest rate environment we are now in, you won't see significant differences between Smith-Wilson and this new methodology. So now what is open? What can we expect? We need to discuss the starting value of the extrapolation. We have to define, that is the last liquid forward rate. That is a new issue that is introduced in order to also consider liquid points post the last liquid point or first smoothing point. And alpha is, of course, the crucial value here. In principle, also the formula could be changed, but I think it cannot be expected that we would go away from this Vasicek-like formula here to extrapolate. But this is an issue, and it would be what we were interested in. It would perhaps be wise not to choose the lowest value of the for the convergence speed, but to have a bit a buffer in order to cope with movements in the interest rate environment. And then another criteria is the identification of the starting point of the extrapolation. This is determined by the residual volume criterion. That means you look at the whole available bonds in the market, and you look at different maturities and to try to find out when which percentage of bonds with that maturity are available in this market. Currently, if you reach the value of 6% or lower, then that is the point where you start your extrapolation. So that is the basic idea in the new extrapolation. Next is the volatility adjustment. That is also a matter of concern for the supervisors. And we have currently a formula that is independent of spreads. Volatility adjustment is determined as a part of spreads observed in the market. And you know, insurance undertakings normally are not required, or they don't need to react on each change of the spreads. So they can add a certain amount, the volatility adjustment, to the risk-free interest rate and have can reach a lower technical provision by doing this calculation in this way. And currently, these the spreads that are observable in the market have to be a bit modified in order to reduce or to some risks inherent in these increased spreads. Spreads are higher than the risk-free, so there must be some risk in it. There could be some risk in it. And currently, this risk correction is done like in the matching adjustment, the fundamental spread. You look at long-term average spreads that are spreads observed over 30 years, and then you take a certain percentage of this, 30% of government bonds and 35% on for corporate bonds, and then you have to consider for corporate bonds the risk of risk of downgrade, cost of downgrade, or the probability of default. And that is the relatively simple formula that is currently used, having corrected the spreads, you take 65% of this risk-corrected spread and say that is the volatility adjustment. And if you can see in the table on the right side, there normally it's a range that is not so dangerous. But we had a situation in 2020 where the volatility adjustment was 42 basis points. And I think you can easily see that it is not possible. Normally, your assets will not be give a reason or could justify the use of such a high risk-free rate to calculate your technical provision. That means there is a kind of overshooting that has to be removed. And this should be done now by not looking at the long-term average spread solely, but also to take into account the observable spread. And that is what has been proposed by EIOPA. Take the long-term average spread still as a basis. Take, for example, for government bonds, take 30% of the long-term average spread. And if as long as the observed spread is lower, and if it is higher, then take this overshooting part and take 20% of this in addition. And so this differs a bit. And if you look at the corporate bond spreads, you see that you don't have this cost of downgrade and probability of default. You have a higher percentage here than in the basic formula. I have shown this formula down. Okay. And what is new, you have to, if you want to use the volatility adjustment for the first time, you need approval by the supervisor. What is now included here is the very rough criterion here. The Commission proposed in the directive now, you will find a 3-layer part of the spread. The risk correction shall be calculated as a percentage of spreads. And this should be done in 3 layers. So it will not be easy, but I think the solution will be that you take this formula currently used and you try to adapt this formula by adding additional terms by making it more complex. Okay, now that is what should be done by the Commission. I go a bit depending on the time. I have mentioned here again what should be done here, the risk correction. The formula has to be decided on, and it is so the interest rate risk here is currently we have, okay, take the next one in order to cope with the time. The old interest rate stress led to the had not foreseen a stress if interest rates are negative, and that has been a severe that was a mistake looking backward, and it was at least not considered when this regulation was introduced. Now the EIOPA proposed a new stress that is a kind of affine stress. You add an additional component to your factors, the proportional stress, and then you come to a picture that is shown in this orange, not in the orange, in the green. I have just to see. Yeah, okay. What you can see, the opinion paper of the of EIOPA led to this orange stress, orange line, and the proposal of the Commission is a bit different. The proposal of the Commission is to extrapolate the what is written down here. First extrapolate, then stress. That was the old solution. You have an extrapolated curve, then you have for 90 years a stress factor that would be used. And now it is required, you have to you stress your liquid part of the curve, and then you extrapolate. And in line with the extrapolation requirements, the procedure described for the extrapolation of the risk-free rate. And if you have a significant impact, you can consider also a phasing in of this new regulation over 5 years. And there's some weak point in addition in the change that I have shown in the interest rate environment led to the effect at least, that in the year 2020, the interest rate up stress was not sufficient. It was not sufficient to cover the real development of this curve. So one should think about adapting these interest rate risk again. And it's also it has of course been underestimated at that time. And then we have a requirement in the directive that the impact of UK data should be analyzed and perhaps removed. So a review of the calibration should eliminate also the pound depending factors or impact. The cost of capital rate is an issue that has been discussed also since the Solvency II, the SCR review. There was always a criticism that the 6% cost of capital rate might be too high or it might be reduced. But then currently we have now this cost of capital rate included in the directive. That was not the case earlier, and it is set to 4.75%. That is a kind of political decision. We had two proposals. One was to take 4.5%. That was the legislature. It came from Parliament, yes, and we had 5%. And now, okay, the classical compromise, actuarial science, is we take the 4.75%. That might be the correct one. So this is, again, another aspect that is to be considered. We should not take the SCR. You have to project the SCR development over the end for the whole duration of the contract. And currently, this projection has each year the equal weight. And now you should take account of the fact that these SCR should not contribute with this. You should build something, exponential and time-dependent element. And this exponential and time-dependent element was introduced by EIOPA by adding this lambda and by considering a floor. And that is the question now that is still open, and that should be done in the delegated act to decide upon the factor lambda, which is currently 0.975, and you should decide on the use of a floor. Should there be a floor or should there be not a floor? That is the question. You can see what is going on also if you look at Great Britain, the UK. They have also discussed this issue. They had a very low factor lambda, but they have introduced a floor, a higher floor. So this is a decision. You should not forget that the most important issue is, of course, of policyholder protection, and you should be always able to meet the requirements resulting from your obligations. Okay, long-term equity. It is a new issue, and the most important issue, it is no longer included in the delegated regulation as Article 171. It is now part of the directive. It is an issue that is important to meet the Commission's targets. They want to have insurers participate in long-term investments, in particular equity, in order to finance all the issues that are relevant for the politic. Now, improving proportionality. Patrick talked about this already a bit. The simplest way to improve proportionality is to increase thresholds. That you have thresholds in Article 4 that tell you which undertaking is excluded from the use of Solvency II. But now it's done a bit more. We have introduced a new class of undertakings, the small and non-complex undertakings, and the new articles in the directive. And so this is an issue that gives some kind of privilege undertakings being accepted as classified as SNCUs. And there was a discussion paper that was already mentioned by Patrick that is on the methodology to be used when classifying undertakings as small and non-complex undertakings. That is one step. The next step is you can also have other undertakings with meeting conditions also for granting or withdrawing supervisory approval to undertakings for for undertakings being not classified as SNCU. And the relevant issues, what could result for undertakings being accepted as SNCU is the list here. It's information to supervisors. You need your RSR every 5 years instead of currently 3 years. Governance issues, ORSA, macroeconomic analysis is not required. Climate risk scenarios are not required. SFCR disclose only the quantitative part. Audits, in general, no audit required. And calculation of the technical provision. You can use a prudent deterministic valuation for the calculation of your technical provisions. And you have the liquidity risk management plans, which is not requested from SNCUs. So you can see it might be important for undertakings to make use of these proportionality measures, and it should be analyzed, or should be a kind of common view, a harmonized view across countries, how you could find these undertakings that are allowed to make use of such proportionality measures. And the prudent deterministic valuation is currently discussed in a consultation paper. And so the idea is you have an undertaking that has only a deterministic model. So now it's the idea, EIOPA will publish a prudent, harmonized, reduced set of scenarios, PHRSS, for that purpose. And it is limited to 10 scenarios in the draft RTS. And so it should allow undertakings to do some iterative calculation with their deterministic model, and to reach some kind of, let me say, pseudo-stochastic. So that is a subject, the methodology that is chosen and is currently discussed can be found in this consultation paper I have mentioned below. So this is an issue that could perhaps help, but nevertheless, you have to decide. It will be a tough job for actuaries to decide whether they want to make use of this, because it has some implications, and I think it will also be laid down in guidelines on the calculation of technical provisions. It's a kind of ESG and ESG light that is used, and there you have to meet the requirements on the ESG that are listed in this guideline. Okay, next is macroprudential analysis. That is another consultation paper, and the one that we didn't intend to comment on is the next one, consultation regarding the crypto assets. That has also been requested from EIOPA in April by a call for advice from the Commission. And so more consultations have been published on day before yesterday, 4th of December. Okay, then the has been a mandate for EIOPA to do an analysis. What is a bit strange is the mixture of numbering. You have now the Article 304C. It was in the previous documents Article 304A. And so the EIOPA should assess the treatment of such investments, exposures related to fossil fuel related issues, and to prepare a report, to provide a report by 30th of September. This report was published on 7th of November 2024, and it considered the feedback that we also gave on two papers published before, discussion paper in 2022 and a consultation paper in 2023. And what you now find in this paper is the idea of penalizing investments in fossil fuel related assets, that you could, for example, investing in stocks in such business would raise the capital requirements up to 17% in additive terms, instead of charge of the bonds should also be penalized again by adding a multiplicative term in addition to the current regulation. And a bit strange is in the cover letter that was sent to Commission, it was mentioned that there has been not a unanimous vote from the Board of Supervisors, and Commission has now to decide how to treat this issue. Okay, then 2 minutes, hopefully a bit late. I have shown here this picture because macroprudential tools are new in the directive. It is a new area. We have a in principle, we have also a macroprudential supervision that is explicitly mentioned here. Currently, EIOPA is of course in touch with the European Systemic Risk Board, with ESRB, but it is not strictly required. And now we have the new chapter 7A in the directive dealing with macroprudential tools. And so what is currently in this chapter, it's the liquidity risk management and the need to provide liquidity risk management plans. And so there's also a it has to be decided which undertaking should be required to do this, to provide these liquidity risk management plans. And then there's an extension by of the power of supervisors in the articles 144B and C, and the criteria how to identify such sector-wide shocks that might trigger the intervention of the supervisors shall be also specified in an RTS. And this RTS is already published and it is currently also discussed, and we have a deadline for response January 2025. And there is how to identify such undertakings that have to develop such a plan. It's a threshold of 12 billion in assets. And of course, the supervisor has the possibility to identify other undertakings. It will talk about the content and structure of the liquidity risk management plans. And its specifications concerning protections of cash flows. And there is required to discuss the buffers of liquid assets. And of course, to develop a liquidity coverage indicator. These are issues that should be assessed at least carefully by undertakings to see what does it mean to them. So that is what I had done here. Sorry for the delay. I had been misestimated the need to talk. Thank you.
No problem, Siegbert, and thank you for kind of really overarching kind of view on these topics. Also on the technical but more wider level, I think you can't do this in a less time without speed talking, but I think we are happy with your talking speed. Anyway, there are questions already. So there are some of those that might be technical, but you can look those. But for everyone who you have already sent questions, we will pick those up in the Q&A. Please send more. But some of those questions might be answered during the sessions already by the speakers. So just to let you know that. But now let's go to Daphné on your presentations, which will go more on the kind of some of the details which we are really seeing, and you in your current position, you certainly see on industry and what is the topics in mind and how companies might be dealing with these. So Daphné, please, floor is yours.
Thank you, Lauri. Thank you, Siegbert, for your technical expertise, because it allows me indeed to give you more a flavor about what we see concretely when anticipating the review of Solvency II, and especially in view of the OSA exercise, you have to anticipate the new regime in 2026 or 2027. So what are still the challenges and the questions the undertakings are facing? So with respect to extrapolation, so indeed the method is somehow easier than the Smith-Wilson. However, there is no EIOPA tool at this stage to allow undertakings to somehow already have the value of the interest rate curve extrapolated in the future, and especially deriving the last liquid forward rate from long-term swap can be challenging. On the volatility adjustment, well, we know that there will be somehow a scaling factor, meaning that non-fixed income will also contribute to the VA as somehow a compensation for the asset liability duration gap, so the CSSR. We expect this to be captured via the EU representative portfolio, but if a company really wants to compute its own VA, this is definitely still a question. As Siegbert mentioned, with respect to the risk correction, to deduce the risk corrected spread, we have a formula now with different legs, with 3 legs, but we do not have at this stage the percentage. So what is really the balance between, I would say, a point-in-time approach versus, I would say, more a through-the-cycle approach. Alternatively, undertakings can take a EIOPA approach that was more on the conservative side because it was a more point-in-time approach as a percentage of the spread. Also, something important to consider as part of the OSA exercise is the own VA. So what is, I would say, the volatility adjustment coming from my own investment portfolio. And this is definitely something to be considered in OSA. Also bearing in mind that there will be an introduction of an optional ratio for basis risk in the Pillar 1. On SCR interest, this is going to be much more punitive than before. So we also see undertakings reconsidering the current asset allocation because we saw the first sign of changes in interest rates, flattening of the curve, the end somehow of inflationary environment. So undertakings tend to reduce the duration gap, which is also important to fully benefit from the volatility adjustment. With respect to the symmetric adjustment, the corridor has been increased. What is important for undertakings is to also analyze the basis risk from the equity position with the EU index underlying the corridor value. On long-term equity, this is definitely a qualification undertakings are interested in. But what is still open and somewhat difficult to manage is that the criteria to qualify for long-term equity at fund level remains open. So that all we know is that they should have a lower risk profile, but it's not very detailed yet. The liquidity test is also to be defined, but there we'll definitely see an increased importance of liquidity risk management. On the risk margin, as Siegbert mentioned, there is still the definition of the lambda factor and an eventual floor that has to be defined. But in that sense, if undertakings want to be on the conservative side, they can take the EIOPA approach. So I think this gives you a nice summary of what topics are considered for the OSA exercise of undertakings who want to anticipate the new prudential regime. The second topic I wanted to discuss with you is really about sustainability in Solvency II. And with respect to sustainable finance in Solvency II, we have several dimensions. About authorities' mandates, ESAs have to develop guidelines on ESG stress test, also including S&G risks, so social and governance risks. EIOPA should review CatNat parameters at least every 5 years. With respect to the report on fossil fuel-related assets, as Siegbert mentioned, it has been recently submitted at the beginning of November this year. And next to climate change to be included in OSA, we now want to address biodiversity risk. On risk management, and it's very an important part for us as actuaries. So we have climate OSA, where you have to consider 2 different scenarios, at least one more on the physical risk, the other one more on the transition risk for material exposures. It should be performed at least every 3 years. Small and non-complex undertakings are exempted from this exercise. What is also important is that somehow we are all aware of the strong evolution of those topics, meaning that you have to describe how your climate also changed since the last time you performed it. So what about the scenarios, the tools, and the underlying methodologies? Also, with respect to risk management, you have the prudent person principle, which makes an explicit reference to long-term impact when you make investment decision. So it's really about your investing activities and the impact on ESG. A very important topic is sustainability risk plans. So those plans are now introduced where you have targets, processes, and actions, including quantifiable targets. They should be part of the SFCR disclosures, and you don't have to perform such a plan if it is already covered by your group. Again, small and non-complex undertakings are exempted. We will come back to those sustainability risk plans in a few minutes. On what to disclose with respect to sustainability, it's about your climate OSA and the change, plus the sustainability risk plan, including the targets, the milestones, and how where you are on those. On governments, well, the administrative and management supervisory body should have good repute. Undertakings shall have an effective risk management system in place, considering, and there we have the link with Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, 3 different horizons, short-term, mid-term, and long-term, with respect to ESG risks. National supervisors have to make sure that ESG risks are considered in the appropriate way, depending also on the time horizons. So what is definitely important is about the sustainability risk plans. What are the standard methodologies, elements of the plans, supervisory approaches, and what to be disclosed? And we had a very recent consultation because it was issued on Wednesday this week. So definitely something to follow up also from the AE perspective. Now, on the sustainability risk plan, and I think it's important to read Article 44, Para 2b. So member states should ensure that insurance undertakings develop, monitor the implementation of specific plans, which includes targets, processes to monitor and address financial risks that are in short, medium, and long term with respect to sustainability factors, but also the ones that are coming from the transition plans. And so there is here a clear link also with the EU climate law and corporate sustainability and reporting directive. And so here, the big challenge is to really understand the synergies with CSRD, because you have this sustainability risk plan and how this interlink with the net zero transition plans and other plans that are expected by CSRD. And so how those plans, prudential and non-prudential, will coexist and also be complementary and consistent, because of course you would have a consistent strategy and a risk management system that should be consistent. So here I take the opportunity to brief you on CSRD. You have lots of information on one slide, but the scope is broad because it's the full ESG coverage on environmental, social, and governance. And on environment, you see climate change, but also diversity, pollution, water, and so on. You have the concept of double materiality assessment. So inside out, how as an undertaking have an impact on the environment, but also outside in, how the environment has an impact on me, both from a risk and opportunity lens. What are the strategies, the governance, the metrics with respect to all those topics? And you also have really the concept of value chain. So it's not only about you as an undertaking, but really as a value chain, what do I need to produce a contract? And when the contract is sold, how is it used? What are the stakeholders? And it's also the concept of my own activities, but also my investment and underwriting activities. And you see that it's a cross-industry framework, but insurance, of course, is very specific, and we are waiting for sector-specific standards that are not expected before 2026. So it's somehow a challenge. And about timeline, this regulation will be applicable for fiscal year 2024 for the big entities that were already subject to non-financial reporting directive, meaning that as an auditor, we have already been considering the double materiality assessment, and that we are closely following them up also on the data request and data burden, as Patrick was referring to at the beginning. So you see that the scope is broad, and it is somehow very important to understand the interaction between CSRD, the transition plans, and how the sustainability risk plan will somehow interact with CSRD. Because here, indeed, that there is the concept of double materiality, whereas we understand that it would be only with respect to Solvency II, the financial materiality from a risk perspective, that the transition plans somehow lead to new risks, that the reporting boundary somehow in CSRD is broader because it is your value chain, not only the undertaking. The time horizon, as defined under CSRD, is short-term is 1 year, medium-term 2 to 5 years, and long-term more than 5 years, whereas as insurers, we are used to work with longer-term horizons. Also, something important to mention is due diligence, in the sense that as insurer, you will be user and provider of CSRD information and sustainability information, and that somehow this regulation is in place to make the system move towards a more sustainable world, in the sense that you are somehow incentivized to actively engaging with your different stakeholders throughout your value chain. Also, for the sake of time, now I'm covering my last point, and as a Belgian actuary, I was asked to somehow share with you the experience we have so far on auditing Solvency II figures, because you should know that since 2016, we have a mandate as auditors to somehow audit the Solvency II figures. So it's not limited to the best estimate and the risk margin and the Solvency II balance sheet, but really also all the QRT figures. So also, I would say the SCR component. And I would say that our experience so far is really good, because it allows us to better understand the business model, the product sold, when you think about the correct application of contract boundaries and best estimate assumptions in terms of lapses, expenses, and also claims patterns. It also allows us to identify the sources of profitability and risk. Let's think in terms of lapses. When we change the lapse assumption, what is the evolution on best estimate and expected profit in future premiums? Also, we can reconcile the Solvency II figures with local GAAP and eventually IFRS 17, though on IFRS 17 for some contracts, it can be really a challenge because of change in contract boundaries. Then we can also identify areas of divergence and perform benchmark on several players on the Belgian market. Once you have audit requirements, somehow you improve the quality of the processes, the internal control system, and you have more assurance on the information that is provided towards the different stakeholders. It can also be really a challenge in terms of respecting deadlines if you have insufficient quality of the process. Then also from a human perspective, it is very interesting because we have close interactions with actuarial function within the undertakings and also supervisor. It also allows supervisors to prioritize inspections and to focus on dedicated scope when they go on inspection. So I think it closes everything I wanted to share with you from a practical angle, and we can now really start the discussion among us.
Thank you, Daphne. Really, really good presentation, and I think you really gave us a good kind of a overview on, for instance, the sustainability is something people are dealing, and obviously one question is how that should be connected with the Solvency II regulation and the work ahead we have there. And then, as you told, auditing is something that some countries have already experienced, some not, and also EIOPA is talking about the supervisory convergence or the convergence of the Solvency II framework in more general, how it's used. So I think that's a really important topic. Anyway, now I think we have, let's start the Q&A, and we certainly have already questions in place. Some are more technical than others, some are more general, and we also identified some questions on ourselves. So I think let's start that one, and everyone please send more questions if you have during the discussion. And we will certainly try to answer on what you have already been sending. There was a question about now when we are recording this, yes, the link will be provided. That's the usual policy. Also, I think we have channels like ActiveView, which is usually accessible for the members of the AAE, where you can afterwards also find these webinars. I think that's it. So you should have this available afterwards. Okay, so let's start. I think the first one goes to, it might go to more to Patrick, but maybe let's all react. And I think this is about the timeline. I think the question was, and I will put it in more general sense, but how we understand the revision of level 3 and level 2 in terms of timelines when these are not finalized. I think just to say, I think as there is a lot of work ahead for EIOPA, and some of the RTS and ITS, and they are certainly kind of on the legislation, and then we have guidances. But then when we have this already, I think now if the timeline is start of 27, how these different kind of sets of legislations and then taking the guidelines will all kind of make sense in the way of the timeline and everybody implementing these. Maybe Patrick, any thoughts from you?
No, yeah, I think the question comes from Lieve, and indeed she asks, how can you already? I have translated very broadly. How can you already work on level 3 if there is a dependency on level 2? Now, we for most of the instruments, I mentioned there is a batch coming up in April. That is between brackets because it assumes that by the end of March next year, there will be a consultation going out from the Commission so that we would know more of the content, and then we can refer to that content. Now, if that, of course, is delayed, most of the April batch will be delayed. I think there's only one instrument that we can still continue. Having said that, all but one already went through our internal processes. So we have already first drafts prepared. We make assumptions, and for some cases, the assumptions are easier than for other cases. So, but of course, not everything within the revision is dependent on level 3. So what it says in a nutshell, we try to do the best we can to already work ahead as much as possible. Why? Also because at the end of the day, I mentioned at the start that we have small teams and we have a lot of things to do. So if we stick to our timelines as much as possible, it means that we can do our work as efficiently as possible. Because if we have to start waiting, it's not that we can start working on other things that are already in the pipeline. It doesn't always work like that. So we try to stick as much as possible to our timelines. And I think for most parts, we can do that. And of course, we will follow very closely the discussions on level 2 that will start next week. also to already get a little bit of an idea which direction the Commission is going to.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. And I think that you covered that really well, Siegbert. Daphné, no, nothing to add from your side, maybe.
It's only the question. I think them guidelines will not be directly affected by the outstanding regulation in level 2. They are already predefined by what we do have in the directive directly. And I think this can, of course, be amended already if there are, in case of existing guidelines. But okay, if you have something that are more closely, like, for example, the calculation of technical provision, that is an issue that heavily depends on the decision of the Commission how to include the requirements in the delegated regulation. So I think it's a kind of mixture, but something you can do, but others you have to wait.
Yeah, okay, yeah, thanks. And then the next one, I think there was 2 technical questions, Siegbert, on your presentation. One was on the VA, on the kind of the factors on WE government and WE corporates, whether these are how these should be understood, and do they count as equal to 1? And then other was on the lambda factor on risk margin. Maybe could you say a couple of words on that topic?
Yeah, the weighting factors are used to identify the weight of the government's bonds in the assets of an undertaking, and of course the weight of the corporate bonds is are used for the same purpose with regard to the other category of bonds that is used. So there are perhaps independent, because it's a and it depends on the structure of these reference portfolios, because they are determined based on the reference portfolio. One of the weaknesses, let me say, of the volatility adjustment, it is not depending on the own assets of the undertaking, but on the reference portfolio. So these weights are then used in order to determine the final risk correction.
Okay, good.
And what was the next?
So yeah. So I think we are and then I think Daphné, there was one, maybe this relates to the, because this relates to the LTEI, and the question was what is the opinion about the new LTEI framework, and how this could be more usable, and Daphné, I think you covered the LTI in your presentation. Would you like to say a couple of words that what's open and maybe how you see that could work well for the industry, for instance?
I think what is definitely important is what will be the criteria, because today it's clear about direct exposures, but for funds it is not clear. So what are the criteria to say that a fund could qualify as long-term equity? There is the liquidity stress test is not defined yet. So this is also something to work on. And I think also the question of 5-year global exposure, what about you? I mean, running your investment also, and considering the future framework. So those are, I think, practical questions that would be used to be addressed quickly, so that also, given the fact that undertakings are reviewing the strategic asset allocation, that they can somehow anticipate those, because the use of long-term equity for direct exposure is more limited.
Yeah. And Patrick, could you say, is there any work expected from EIOPA side when it comes to long-term equity, or it basically settled in the delegate acts, and how you see this from EIOPA?
Yeah, it's now at level 2. Indeed, we did provide advice on the long-term equities. So for us, it's very important that at the end of the day, you could say it is investment backing liabilities that are truly long-term. I think this is an important element, and that's where we see, because I think what annoys me a little bit, and I'm talking very much on a personal level, is that regulation is seen as, you could say, levers on which we magically can make things happen in the economy. You need to have long-term products, true long-term products, because that is the base on which you can do true long-term investment. So I would say some stimulation of the pension market is in that sense very welcome in many markets in Europe. And then think not only about saving products, but on true pension products, because only with a true long-term horizon you can make true long-term investments, and then put a little bit of skin in the game. So we talked about the European Investment Bank and how to stimulate more investments in the European economy. Well, if you take away some of the risks for investors by, you could say, putting guarantees up for long-term investments, I'm pretty sure that will help a lot of risk managers to be conveyed that this is actually a good investment, because they're looking a lot for good investments in Europe, but there's simply not enough available of them. So yes, of course, we are responsible for the policy part. We do what we can here, but if I would have to give advice to the political level, is to look also at other ways to stimulate, because I think there's a huge opportunity, there's a huge need to stimulate this economically, but I think through the regulation is not the viable path in my view.
Okay. Yeah.
I fully concur with you, Patrick, in the sense that there are huge opportunities and needs, that we are really eager to see the liquidity stress plan, and also how companies can leverage on their existing plans. And indeed, we saw over the last years significant lapses in several countries. So indeed, how to design products that can somehow mitigate those lapses depending on the financial environment, and alternative investment opportunities to make long-term insurance products.
Yeah, I think in that sense, sometimes the element of consumer protection or individual choice gets a little bit blurred with the objectives of which these products are designed, right? And what sounds good on paper, for instance, that what we had in discussion on the PEP that we designed in EIOPA, that you have the opportunity always to take your money out and to go to another supply. It sounds great in practice, but then in reality it means that nobody can touch these products, because how can you make long-term investments if your client can step away at any time and you need to provide them with all their investments back? I think it's economically simply not working. So you need to be more bold, I would say, in your design of products, and more clear and transparent to citizens what that means in practice. So a pension product means indeed you cannot touch it until you're retired, and maybe you can take a sum out, but not all of it out, because you also want to have a decumulation phase. You want to make sure that it's truly long-term for a very dedicated portion of it. And then we can do a lot of, I think, really good things in our economy.
Yeah. No, thank you. I think that was really kind of a honest answer, and certainly touching the maybe some the issues there. I think we could. There was one question on the liquidity risk management, kind of on the other side of the kind of long-term business, and also there is new requirements on the liquidity risk management, and I think this goes to every one of you. I think the question was that for the case of extreme adverse liquidity crisis scenarios like 2008, what we had, is there any role under consideration for margin capital requirements, namely capital required for the case when undertakers have to engage on forced asset selling or at asset prices heavily discounted because of the vanish of alternative credit facilities. So basically on the structures on the liquidity risk management, and what we are now having on consultation, but also more overall on the topic. I think we will in a year, Patrick, there will be supervisory powers also on this topic. So there is a kind of a lot of work going on here. But maybe, Patrick, would you like to start, and everyone else? Please?
Yeah, maybe I can say some things, because I think what we have in consultation is the plans, right? And maybe it's also my understanding of the question. I think what we currently have in our regime is already the need to ensure that insurance have sufficient liquid assets, you would say, in case that there is stressed liquidity. So the stress test liquid is already part of the framework. What is now new is, you could say, a reporting of the analysis, and of course also follow-up action from the supervisor. So I would say these are already part of existing requirements.
I would follow this. Yeah, I see it. We should not expect from my point of view, the directive for Solvency II to be a rules-based system, so that it prescribes each issue that had to be considered. I think it's in the undertakings are required or requested to identify risks they are exposed to. This, if you have the situation like in the UK some years ago with the pension business, you have such calls, but it might not be of that relevance for life insurers. So I think it depends on the risk structure, on the structure of the undertakings, and then they have to decide whether it's worth to consider it or not. Liquidity risk management is already part of the risk management requirements of an undertaking. So it's, I don't know if we can expect an concrete prescribed method to assess this risk.
Yeah. Thank you, Siegbert. I think the next questions, and this is an interesting one on the ESG and assets, and we considered kind of the prudential treatment, and this is about the weapon industry, and obviously now we have for 2 years or more we have had the war in Ukraine, and it is certainly one topic. And the question was that the kind of, when producing arms, will there be a kind of allowance for insurance companies to invest in weapon industry? Will this be maybe restricted? I think there was a reference to the banking side and when giving loans that there would be some restrictions. I think, Patrick, also you see this work, there's a lot of work with ESMA and EBA. Also, you might see ECB, ESRB kind of working with this topic. So I think it's a kind of it considers financial industry quite overall, but then you might have different ways to tackle some of the topics here.
Yeah, I think I can only refer to it was already mentioned also in Siegbert's presentation on the report that we published on the sustainability and treatment of the prudential treatment of sustainability risks. Now, why is that letter attached to that report? Because you can also say we did technical work and we try to remain technical, but this is a political topic as well. We understand that. So a number of our supervisory authorities, I would say, signaled that there was a misalignment between the insurance side and the banking side. Yeah, that happens because we went earlier. The banking now needs to follow. But it was also clear that in some cases there was also some political pressure on the supervisors to not accept, you could say, this direction, and to be quite frank. And I understand where that comes from, right? There is some concerns that we as supervisors are then put in front of, you could say, a cause, and that's never our intention. We are and we should be always risk-based. So then coming back to this point, so on the weapons industry, this is a political choice at the end of the day. If it's risk-based, so if we can see that investments in those type of industries lead to significantly higher risk, then of course it will be penalized, as it was mentioned by Siegbert, or maybe it will be reflected properly in the calibrations. And this is what we did also with the sustainability risk. I was a bit triggered by the word penalized, because I don't think it's penalization, because that would suggest that there is, you could say, an idea behind it to say you need to go to the left instead to the right. No, it's just on basis of our analysis and our assessment, there is a higher risk. So that's why we ask for higher calibrations. And I would say that we will always follow the same logic on this.
Yeah, I can add here, we had, of course, this consultation paper, and we have seen how EIOPA came to the conclusion that it might be justified. What we had as a concern was the short period where market data could be observed. There is no doubt that this risk has to be considered in the author. The question was whether it should be considered in the standard formula calculation. And there is something strange that came to my mind when I read this. Now you have an additional 17 percentage point for the equity equities. What happens if equities are assessed as long-term equities? We still have the 22%, or what would happen in this case? So there is something, linkages or mixed effects that could result from this.
No, it's true. The data is never perfect, Siegbert. I think that is clear for us as well. I have to say that some calibrations in Solvency II are even based on less available data. So in that sense, it's always a choice. Yeah.
Okay, agree.
I think what is also a challenge with respect to the qualification of the sector, because some energy companies are mixing different energies as part also of the transition. And that's a real challenge to say what is fossil fuel versus the rest of the company.
Okay, I think there will be a couple of questions, even people asking, and not by writing. I think we can allow also that. I just learned, but anyway, I will just take one more before giving the question, taking the question from Christos and Fanny. So I think the one we had was on SNC use and the stochastic methods, and the question was that that a company that is currently using stochastic methods couldn't anymore apply the prudent valuation of the 10 scenario approach, and whether this would imply to only companies that are currently applying this deterministic approach or not. So I think it's more kind of whether the current practice is something, and now we have the new rules here. So what that might mean, whether one company could go more to the deterministic side and apply that possibility.
Yeah, maybe if I can answer that, because I think this is on the I guess that we do on the methodology for determining scenarios for prudent deterministic valuation. What it says here, it allows undertakings to perform this. So in our view, it's not a mandatory element. So that means that you're still free to perform it in the way that the company deems it in its best interest to do so. It's just an option that is provided.
Yeah, but anyway, I think we will have some. There will be some. Maybe the wording and how you should do that if you're not using deterministic. Maybe there is also maybe new requirements, and taking, for instance, the kind of that how you should do that. So maybe now there might be different practices which might change. Siegbert, please.
Yeah, I think it's an important issue. It's not a mandatory option. It's a proportionality measures, and undertakings can choose whether they want to use this measure or not. The question whether you could go back from a stochastic model to a PDV, the prudent deterministic valuation, I think that is not. I would not say how it should be done. From my mind, I would not see this as a doable an issue once you have established such a model. What could be the reason to go back? There might be one, but I'm not aware of it.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Okay, but anyway, now let's have two questions first.
Lauri, there is one question in the chat on the lambda factor in the risk margin calculation. I'm aware, okay. But trying to keep an order here. So maybe we have a question from Fanny de Clay. Would you be able to ask your question? Can we unmute you? I think it's do you hear us? Because I don't get any. I think. Well, let's settle that in a moment. So we can while setting on that. I think there was comment on the or question on the what was it, Siegbert? It was on the way the factor lambda has been defined, or what EIOPA had done to come to this value of 0.975. I think Patrick should know best, but otherwise who want to read can look in the background documents.
This is what I wanted to say, actually. There's a lot of information on the 2020 review on our website. So
there has been an exercise where they try to determine a suitable value for such a lambda. And there are some attempts made, and you could, of course, assess the methodology used for this. You could question the methodology used for this, but also some investigations in the AAE came to a conclusion that this 0.975 could be a suitable value.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I don't think we are now able to take the question from kind of, we are only able to take the written questions. So maybe maybe the last one, and this taking that our audience are many actuaries, I would maybe ask from all of you. Now, when we see the Solvency II review, maybe the question from the actuarial point of view, that what new skills are needed for actuaries, or maybe even other insurance professionals, because of the new kind of requirements what we have. There are topics like we have learned dealing with macroprudential risks, the sustainability angle, scenarios work, more understanding on liquidity and so on. So maybe what would be your kind of the 1 minute you need to learn more about this for actuaries? Maybe Patrick, would you like to start?
Thanks, Lauri. Now I would maybe turn it to a different corner here a little bit and say that there is, of course, as always, the awareness of emerging risks. For actuaries, I think you are, as a profession, quite well positioned, because I think with the strong quantitative background, I think the upcoming use of AI technologies will be, I think, the major area to tackle going forward. But here, I think there's already a lot of work going on in your area, a lot of programs that are set up to upgrade skills that you would need to fully understand, you could say, how these new products are being, you could say, implemented and used in the practical day-to-day of the companies. So use of AI in a nutshell.
Thank you. Siegbert.
From my point of view, it's always the same. We're talking quite a lot about Pillar 1 regulation in the Solvency II. We would have to motivate actuaries, risk managers to live up to the requirements of Solvency II and not ask for rules, but look at the principles that are behind it. And looking at the principles, you can see in the case of the volatility adjustment, for example, you do some kind of refinement in Pillar 1, but that doesn't solve any of the problems, because the reference portfolio is different from your portfolio. The work still remains, and you have additional requirements. So from my point, for the actuarial profession, try to not to ask for rules, try to develop a kind of feeling for risk that your undertaking is exposed to, and then see how you can solve it.
That's a good answer. That's a good answer. Daphné, please.
I think it would be indeed that we have a framework, but we need some freedom in this framework. Also, given the fact that there are several new regulations, new challenges, and also important to understand the different points of view and objectives and try to make them converge.
Good. Okay, but with that, I would end the Q&A and certainly thank you, Patrick, Siegbert, Daphné, for really good presentations. I think we have learned a lot today. It's a topic which is a lot on everybody's table right now and will be for the next year, that's for sure. And obviously in AA we will continue with the topics. I would also thank you for all the audience, many of you being here this morning. Also for really good questions that helps us on fruitful discussions. So thank you everyone, and hope to see you all in the future AAE webinars. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.